Welcome back to the Academy. Today we're going to be looking at painting a Fauvist landscape. Our lesson and objective is using passive or calm parts of our painting using blending against or versus active parts of our painting using brush strokes to create those active parts of our painting. Alright, so to get started we're going to look at two artworks. The first one here, this is called Coulier Mountains by Duran. It was painted in 1905. And there's a couple different passages I want to talk about first. This one here is the blending. The blending here in the background, you can see all the blending work here in the mountains. And I'm going to zoom in on this part right here to show you the blending that Duran did. This is a great example of Fauvism because of the bright, vibrant colors that he used. And you can see the blending here, the orange and this magenta here and this darker magenta. He created the blending by using the two wet colors on the canvas or paper in our case, the orange and the magenta, and moving his brush back and forth and blending those two areas together so that there's no line or edge in between those passages. So if we look at the rest of his painting, you can see he used blending, up here in this corner. He used it in here in the mountain, and what the blending does is it creates a nice calm passage for the eye to rest somewhere in the painting. Now, juxtaposed to that or against that, he's used these brush strokes here in the trees to create a very active feel. It creates a texture, it creates movement for the eye, so that if we zoom in on these places, you can see those brush strokes really create the feeling of the tree. But he's used different colors and overlapped the different brush strokes on top of each other to create that different part of the painting. And then likewise here you can see he's changed the colors yet again. So our two different kinds of technique here are blending and brush strokes. Now those two things are going to create different feels in our painting depending where we are. Now last week we made our underpaintings and we used blending for most of that. So in this picture I want you to take a moment and look at where you see the blending. Good, yeah, it's right. You see the blending right here in the buildings. You also see the blending mostly here right on the bridge part. Now, the active brush strokes would be up here in the sky, and he's used yellow and dark yellow and pink and taken his brush strokes kind of on a diagonal. Okay, now we're going to zoom in and look at the background color. Look at this yellowish color that he's painted in the background first. He doesn't have very much blending, but what he's done after he did this undercolor, which we did last week, right? He took the yellow and did more of the overlapping brush strokes. He's got the normal yellow here, darker yellow here, then a lighter yellow, pink, and then as he moves through the picture, he's got some bluish, some pink, and as we even get further over, he's got some green. All these brush strokes in the sky are on a diagonal. They're all kind of having a direction. And part of using brush strokes is to make sure that you do have a direction of your brush strokes. You want your brush strokes to have meaning. So these ones are meaning the light is coming down from the sun. These brush strokes here on the water have the meaning that they are they're showing the different water ripples in the water. Okay, so in here you can again see that he's used light green, dark green, light blue, dark blue, regular blue, and if we scroll through you can see that the colors change ever so slightly, and then when we get over here he's got even just the blue and the yellow. But those brush strokes have purpose. They are horizontally laid on there so that they look like the water ripples in the picture. So number one, you should have good blending underneath, and then on top of that you have good brush strokes that have direction and purpose. Those are two very important things, the direction and the purpose. So here we go. This is where we left off with our painting last time. Now in this painting you'll see in a lot of the passages I've used blending here in the sky, in this cloud, used blending here next to the sun, used it in the trees and in the foreground, and I did lots of blending. The blending I did filled in most of the painting except for the very small details in the back. Then as I pull through here you'll see that I use a detail brush, and I use that detail brush to do the small details in the mountain. Now those details are some of them bigger, some of them smaller, but I mostly use the detail brush to make small brush strokes in the background. So depending on what part of your painting you're working on, you're going to think of what brush do I need. Do I need a small detail brush to do the little teeny strokes in the background? Do I need a medium-sized brush to fill in the middle ground here, or do I need a large brush to make large brush strokes in the front? So you can see in the back here where I'm working on the mountains, I'm using a combination of blending and a combination of small brush strokes to give the mountains some form and some direction. Okay, I'm using my brush strokes to make the direction in the painting and to make the mountains have nice texture. Now as I get to here, I'm just ever so slightly adjusting the color so that I can fill in the cloud up at the top here. Now as I fill it in, I'm being careful to let some of the paint, the original paint color, show through. So we have a combination of that blending of my original undercoat as well as some of that active brush work. So now my cloud is looking much more active with those larger brush strokes. I continue to finish my cloud and add some blending in and let some of the original color show through, just like I did right up here. Now I move into the middle ground right in this passage here, and what I do is I create a little farm field, and to create that farm field I mix my color and I start painting it in, and then I'm going to make the farm field using a strategy called sgraffito. Now sgraffito is when you have a nice thick layer of paint and you use a tool, in this case I'm going to use the back of the brush handle, to scratch through the paint. And sgraffito is Italian for to scratch. Okay, so you can use that word in a lot of different senses in artistic work, but in this sense we're going to use it as we're scratching through that wet paint. And once I scratch through that wet paint, you're going to see that it leaves the undercolor, that light greenish color back here, showing through. So you can see the horizontal lines that I've created. Now this is different from brush strokes in one sense that it's not a brush stroke, it's sgraffito, and it's but in the same way it's similar because it creates another feeling to the painting, another way to create texture, another way to create an active part of your painting. So now you can see I'm kind of filling the brush strokes in the middle ground here, and I'm still using a detail brush, but I make larger brush strokes with my hand. So I'm kind of making a medium-sized brush stroke. And I do that here in the middle ground. Okay. Now, if I pull up the next painting where I start working on the middle ground again, I change brushes here. Okay, and I change the brushes to have a larger brush stroke. Right. I'm using a 1/4 inch easel brush, and that 1/4 inch easel brush is going to give me a different stroke. The way that I'm moving it horizontally here is going to show a different kind of brush stroke than I have in my middle ground up here. And as I kind of pull through into the bottom of the painting, this more foreground area here, you're going to see that I start having nice large to medium brush strokes, which is good. We want our brush strokes to look different. You don't want your brush strokes to all look the same or all have the same feel to them. So as I pull through, I create these brush strokes in here, and then I switch back to a detail brush to do the little lake. I want the lake to look different than the larger brush strokes next to it, and I want those pieces to show the paint and to kind of reflect the sky, because the sky up here is magenta and yellow, so I kind of reflect the magenta and yellow in that little lake. Now moving into the next part, I do the trees, and I use the active color of magenta against this green, and that really creates another contrast of paint color. Not so much active of brush stroke, but active in the color sense, where I'm juxtaposing an active color combination, which is a complementary color combination. Now in the front, I go through and I finish these big brush strokes in the front of my painting. Okay, and in the front of my painting, I use the big brush and make big brush strokes. You can kind of see right down here and in here. If you look at these brush strokes, in comparison to the brush strokes in the back, these ones are huge. I mean, they're maybe an inch, 2 inches long, and these ones back here are just maybe like an eighth of an inch long. So wherever you are in your painting, you want to make sure you're using the appropriate brush stroke, whether it's a huge brush stroke in the front, a medium brush stroke in the midground, or a very small brush stroke in the background. So if I finally pull all the way through here, I finish off these trees in the foreground using strong brush strokes. I finish the middle ground and the medium background with the houses in the back here with blending. I want them to be calm. They're kind of subdued. I want them to kind of sit in the background, but I want them to still be there. Now that I'm done with all my brush strokes, I go to that final detail part. Notice I am using a detail brush, and I'm being very careful and thoughtful about how I fill in those spaces. So by the end, your painting should look something like this with those different brush strokes in the foreground, medium brush strokes in the middle ground, smaller brush strokes in the background. Again, thinking of passive parts of the painting where it's blended so the eye can rest carefully and calmly in those spots, and then creating active parts of the painting that will excite the eye with all the movement and texture of the brush strokes. So that is how to create and finish your Fauvism landscape painting using passive or calm areas of blending as well as active areas of brush strokes.